The legend. The Galactic Council chambers buzzed with nervous energy as Admiral Vex of the Krell Empire stood before the assembled alien representatives. His four arms gestured dramatically as he spoke of humanity's final stand 3 decades ago. The humans called it the Defiant, Vex began, his voice carrying across the vast hall. Their last warship, fleeing Earth as our combined fleets reduced their homeworld to ash and ruin. The other species listened intently. The bird-like avians ruffled their feathers, while the crystalline Nexus beings pulsed with dim light. Everyone remembered the human galactic war, a brief but brutal conflict that ended with humanity's extinction. We pursued them to the edge of the galaxy, continued Admiral Vex. The Defiant was damaged, leaking atmosphere and radiation. Our sensors tracked them toward the dead zone, that region of space where ships simply vanish. Captain Rex, a scared veteran from the reptilian hegemony, stood up. I was there, Admiral. We lost contact with the human ship as it entered the anomaly field. No vessel has ever returned from the dead zone. Exactly, Vex nodded. The humans and their ghost ship disappeared 30 years ago. Dead. Gone. Forgotten. But not everyone in the chamber looked convinced. Elder Nyx of the Voidwalkers, ancient beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, spoke in her whispered voice. The humans were resourceful. Their final transmission spoke of vengeance, of returning when the galaxy least expected it. The other delegates laughed. The Krell Empire had grown strong in the decades since humanity's defeat, absorbing human technology and expanding their territory. The Avian Federation had claimed human trade routes, while the reptilian hegemony had colonized former human worlds. Fairy tales, scoffed Admiral Vex. The humans are extinct. Their ghost ship is space debris floating in the void. Unknown to the assembled delegates, their conversation was being monitored by long-range sensors. Deep in the dead zone, where space itself seemed to bend and twist, something stirred. The hull of a human warship, scared by 3 decades of impossible journeys through dimensions that shouldn't exist, began to power up its engines. Inside the Defiant, Captain Kane stood on the bridge, his hair now silver with age, his face marked by years of surviving in the space between realities. Around him, his crew of 47 humans, the last of their species, prepared for their return. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Fox from the navigation station, "we're receiving the transmission from the Galactic Council. They think we're dead." Kane smiled grimly. "Good. Let them keep thinking that. How long until we reach normal space?" 6 hours, Captain, replied Commander Blake from the weapons station. "All systems are ready. The modifications we've made during our journey are online." The Defiant was no longer the same ship that had fled Earth 30 years ago. Its hull now gleamed with alien metals found in the dead zone, its weapons powered by energy sources that existed outside normal physics. The crew had learned to survive in a realm where the laws of reality were merely suggestions. "They destroyed our world," Kane said quietly, staring at the viewscreen showing the swirling chaos of the dead zone. "They hunted us like animals. They thought they had won." "What are your orders, sir?" asked Commander Blake. Kane turned to face his crew, humans who had become something more than human during their exile in impossible space. "We return home. We remind the galaxy why they should have made sure we were truly dead." As the Defiant prepared to leave the dead zone, its sensors detected something that made the crew smile with cold satisfaction. The Galactic Council had assembled the largest fleet in their history for a military parade, celebrating 30 years of peace since humanity's defeat. Over 2,000 ships from every major species would be gathered in the Sol system, at the coordinates where Earth once orbited. It was meant to be a symbol of galactic unity, built on the grave of the human homeworld. "How poetic," Kane murmured. "They're throwing a party on our grave." The Defiant began its final approach to normal space, its impossible engines humming with power that should not exist. Soon, the galaxy would learn that some ghosts don't rest quietly. and some species should never be presumed extinct. The return. The Celebration fleet stretched across the void where Earth once existed. 2,000 warships from 12 different species formed a massive formation, their hulls gleaming under the light of Sol. The destroyed remnants of humanity's homeworld had long since been cleared away, replaced by a monument to galactic unity. Admiral Vex stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion, watching the parade through the viewports. Ships from the Krell Empire, Avian Federation, Reptilian Hegemony, and 9 other species moved in perfect formation. It was the largest gathering of military vessels in galactic history. 30 years of peace, Vex announced over the fleet-wide communication channel. 30 years since we eliminated the human threat. Today we celebrate our victory and our unity. Captain Rex, now commanding his own dreadnought, replied from his ship. The galaxy is safer without their warmongering species. They brought this fate upon themselves. On the edge of the system, space itself began to ripple. The fabric of reality twisted and bent as something pushed through from the dead zone. Warning alarms should have sounded, but the anomaly was too subtle, too controlled. The Defiant slipped into normal space like a shadow returning to light. Captain Kane stood on his bridge, studying the massive fleet through sensors that had been enhanced by 30 years in impossible space. His crew worked quietly around him, their movements precise and deadly calm. 2,000 ships, reported Lieutenant Fox. Every major species is represented. They're all here. Perfect, Kane replied. Commander Blake, status report. Blake checked his console, where readings displayed energy signatures that shouldn't exist. All weapons are charged, sir. The dead zone modifications are stable. We're ready. The Defiant had been transformed during its exile. Its hull was now composed of materials that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making it nearly impossible to detect or target. Its weapons drew power from the space between realities, capable of unleashing forces that no galactic species had ever encountered. They're celebrating on our grave, Kane said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of planning. Let's remind them why humans never surrender. The ghost ship began its approach, moving silently through the outer system. Its advanced stealth systems, evolved from human technology, but enhanced by impossible physics, kept it hidden from the Celebration fleet's sensors. On the Dominion, a junior officer at the sensor station frowned at his readings. Admiral, I'm detecting a minor spatial distortion on the system's edge. Admiral Vex barely glanced at the report. Probably debris from the old human settlements. Today is about celebration, not chasing shadows. The officer nodded and returned to his duties, missing the moment when the distortion suddenly vanished, not because it was gone, but because it had moved beyond his sensor's ability to track. The Defiant glided through the fleet like a predator among prey. Kane watched as alien warships passed nearby, their crews unaware that death moved silently among them. He recognized ship designs, Krell battlecruisers that had bombarded human colonies, avian fighters that had strafed fleeing refugee ships, reptilian dreadnoughts that had cracked Earth's orbital defenses. Sir, whispered Commander Blake, we could destroy them all right now. One shot from our main weapon would chain react through their entire formation. Kane shook his head. No. They need to see us first. They need to know what's coming. He activated the ship's communication system, overriding every channel in the fleet. The Defiant simultaneously dropped its stealth fields, appearing on every sensor screen like a ghost materializing in daylight. Attention, Celebration Fleet. Kane's voice echoed across 2,000 ships. This is Captain Kane of the human warship Defiant. We've returned. Chaos erupted across the fleet. Bridge crews stared in disbelief at their screens, showing the human ship that shouldn't exist. Panic filled communication channels as commanders tried to understand how a dead species had returned from the void. Admiral Vex felt his blood turn cold as he stared at the impossible sight. That's not possible. The humans are extinct. That ship was destroyed 30 years ago. Apparently not, Kane's voice continued, broadcast across every ship. You thought you had won. You thought you had eliminated us. You were wrong. The Defiant hung motionless in space, surrounded by 2,000 enemy warships. But somehow, it was the alien fleet that seemed vulnerable. We spent 30 years in the dead zone, Kane announced. 30 years learning things that shouldn't be learned. Growing stronger. Planning our return. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Today, the galaxy remembers why you should have made sure we were truly dead. The demonstration, 770 words. The Celebration fleet hung frozen in space. 2,000 warships suddenly transformed from predators into prey. On every bridge, alien commanders stared at their screens in disbelief. The impossible had happened. A dead species had returned from the void. Admiral Vex recovered first, his military training overriding his shock. All ships, battle stations, surround that vessel immediately. Across the fleet, weapons powered up and shields activated. Krell battlecruisers moved to flanking positions while avian fighters swarmed like angry insects. The reptilian dreadnoughts brought their massive guns to bear on the lone human ship. Captain Kane watched the fleet's response with cold satisfaction. They still think in terms of numbers, he said to his crew. They haven't learned. Sir, reported Lieutenant Fox, we're completely surrounded. Every ship in the fleet has weapons locked on us. Good, Kane replied. Let them see what we've become. Admiral Vex opened a communication channel to the Defiant. Human ship, you are outnumbered 2,000 to 1. Surrender immediately, and your death will be quick. Kane's laughter echoed across the fleet channels. Surrender. Admiral, we didn't return from the dead zone to surrender. We came back to teach the galaxy a lesson. You're insane, Vex snarled. One ship against our entire fleet. Even humans aren't that stupid. You're right, Kane agreed. We're not that stupid. We're something much worse. Commander Blake, demonstrate our capabilities. Blake nodded and activated a single weapon system. The Defiant didn't fire projectiles or energy beams like normal warships. Instead, reality itself seemed to bend around the ghost ship. Space twisted, creating invisible corridors of force that reached out toward the nearest enemy vessels. 3 Krell battlecruisers simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized. They were deleted from reality as if they had never been built. Where massive warships had floated moments before, only empty space remained. The fleet channels erupted in panic and confusion. What happened to the thunder? Where did the vengeance go? Sensors show nothing. They're just gone. Kane's voice cut through the chaos. That was a warning shot. We learned many interesting things in the dead zone. Admiral, we learned that reality is far more flexible than your species imagine. Admiral Vex stared at the empty space where his ships had been. His scanners detected no debris, no energy signatures, no trace that 3 battlecruisers had ever existed. Impossible. No weapon can simply erase matter from existence. Conventional weapons can't, Kane agreed. But we stopped using conventional weapons 30 years ago. Blake, show them another lesson. This time, the Defiant targeted a formation of avian fighters. The reality distortion reached out like an invisible hand, but instead of erasing the ships, it folded space around them. The fighters found themselves trapped in a pocket dimension, visible but unable to move, their weapons unable to fire, their engines unable to respond. We can erase you, Kane announced, or we can trap you outside normal space. We can do things to your ships that your science cannot explain or counter. Captain Rex's voice crackled over the communication channel. You're bluffing. Even if you have some new weapon, you can't fight our entire fleet. Can't we? Kane asked. How many ships are you willing to lose to find out? 10. 100. All of them. The fleet began to spread out, commanders trying to put distance between their ships and the impossible human vessel. But the Defiant didn't pursue. It simply waited, like a predator confident in its superiority. You see, Kane continued, his voice carrying across every ship, you made a mistake 30 years ago. You thought you were dealing with just another warlike species. You thought we were like you, limited by conventional physics, bound by normal space." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But humans have one trait that your species lack. When we're pushed to the edge of extinction, we don't just adapt, we transcend." Admiral Vex realized the terrible truth. The human ship wasn't just armed with impossible weapons, it was operating by rules that no longer applied to normal space. They had spent 3 decades in the dead zone, learning to manipulate reality itself. "What do you want?" Vex asked, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Kane's answer was simple and terrifying. "We want you to remember. We want the galaxy to understand what happens when you try to extinct humanity." The Defiant began to move through the fleet, not attacking but demonstrating. Ships flickered in and out of existence, trapped in spatial loops, or found their weapons turned into flowers. Reality bent around the ghost ship like water around a stone. "This is impossible," whispered Elder Nix over the communication channels. "They've become something beyond our understanding." "Yes," Kane agreed. "And now, the real demonstration begins." The reckoning. The massive celebration fleet had become a prison of terror. Ships drifted helplessly as their crews watched the Defiant move among them like death itself. Reality twisted around the human vessel, demonstrating powers that defied every law of physics the galaxy understood. Captain Kane stood calmly on his bridge, watching as panic spread through enemy ranks. "Commander Blake, begin the reckoning protocol." Blake's fingers moved across controls that hummed with impossible energy. Targeting systems locked on primary command vessels. "Ready to proceed." "Sir." Admiral Vex's voice crackled across all channels, desperate now. "Wait. We can negotiate. There's no need for more violence." Kane's response was cold as the void between stars. "Negotiate. Like you negotiated when you glassed our colonies. Like you negotiated when you hunted our children through the ruins of their schools." The Defiant stopped moving and hung motionless in the center of the fleet. Around it, 2,000 alien warships waited like condemned prisoners. The ghost ship had become the eye of a storm that was about to break. "You want to know what we learned in the dead zone?" Kane asked. "We learned that consciousness shapes reality. We learned that will, focused by desperation and refined by decades of impossible survival, can rewrite the fundamental rules of existence." He activated the ship's main display, showing images that made alien crews gasp in horror. The dead zone wasn't empty. It was alive with structures that shouldn't exist, powered by energies that violated causality itself. "We built a civilization in the space between realities," Kane continued. 47 humans became something more than human. We became wielders of forces that your science calls impossible. Lieutenant Fox reported from her station. "Sir, we're detecting movement from the outer fleet elements. Some ships are trying to escape." Kane nodded. "Let them run. Fear is as important as death for what comes next." The fleeing ships suddenly found themselves moving backward, their engines thrust reversed by spatial distortions. No matter how hard they pushed their drives, they were pulled inexorably back toward the Defiant. "No one leaves," Kane announced, "until the lesson is complete." Captain Rex's dreadnought tried to fire its main weapons, massive plasma cannons that could crack moons. The beams launched toward the human ship, and simply vanished, absorbed into folds of twisted space around the Defiant. "Your weapons cannot harm us," Kane said, "but ours can do far worse than destroy you." The Defiant began to glow with energy that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The light hurt to look at, not because it was bright, but because mortal minds weren't designed to perceive forces from outside normal reality. "We could erase your entire fleet," Kane continued. "Delete you from history so completely that your species would forget you ever existed. But that would be too quick, too merciful." Instead, the ghost ship did something far more terrifying. It began to change the alien vessels themselves. Krell battlecruisers found their hulls transforming into crystalline structures that pulsed with alien thoughts. avian fighters discovered their engines had become living organs that screamed in frequencies beyond sound. "We're turning your ships into extensions of our will," Kane explained as horror spread through the fleet. "You wanted to celebrate on humanity's grave. Now you'll serve as monuments to our return." Admiral Vex watched his flagship's bridge begin to shift and flow like liquid metal. His cruise stations merged with their bodies, creating hybrid beings that were part alien, part machine, part something beyond both. "Please," Vex begged, his voice distorting as his throat began to change. "We surrender. We'll do anything you want." "Surrender?" Kane laughed, the sound echoing across dimensions. "You don't understand. This isn't a battle anymore. This is evolution. You're becoming part of something greater, a warning to the galaxy written in flesh and steel." The transformation spread through the fleet like a plague of impossible change. Ships and crews merged into new forms that served the Defiant's will. What had been a celebration fleet was becoming an armada of living nightmares, each vessel a fusion of alien consciousness and human imagination unleashed from the constraints of reality. "We spent 30 years learning to remake the possible," Kane said as the last independent ship submitted to the change. "Now you'll help us teach that lesson to the rest of the galaxy." The transformed fleet began to move as one, no longer individual ships, but parts of a single entity, controlled by the ghost ship at its heart. They would return to their home systems not as conquerors, but as harbingers, spreading the news of humanity's return. "The dead don't stay buried," Kane whispered as his new armada prepared to depart. "And some species should never be presumed extinct." The new dawn. The transformed armada spread across the galaxy like a plague of impossible truth. What had once been the greatest celebration fleet in galactic history was now something far more terrifying, a living testament to humanity's return from the void. Captain Kane stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching as his new fleet carried his message to every corner of known space. The ships that had once belonged to 12 different species now served as extensions of human will, their crews transformed into hybrid beings that existed between life and machinery. "Status report," Kane ordered. Commander Blake checked his readings, numbers that defied conventional understanding. "The conversion fleet has reached 47 systems. Every major species has received our message. The galaxy knows we've returned." Through the ship's impossible sensors, Kane could see the panic spreading across civilized space. On the Krell homeworld, their high command stared at reports of their missing celebration fleet. The Avian Federation had recalled all their ships to defensive positions. The reptilian hegemony was mobilizing every weapon they possessed. "They're afraid," observed Lieutenant Fox. "Good. Fear will make them listen." Kane nodded. "Fear is the beginning of wisdom. For 30 years, they lived in comfort built on our graves. Now they'll learn the price of trying to extinct humanity." The communication channels filled with desperate pleas from across the galaxy. Species that had celebrated humanity's destruction now begged for mercy, for negotiation, for any hope of survival against the ghost ship's impossible power. "Captain," came a transmission from the Galactic Council chambers. "This is Elder Nyx of the Void Walkers. We must speak." Kane smiled grimly. The Void Walkers were the oldest species in the galaxy, beings who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. If they wanted to talk, it meant the galaxy was finally ready to listen. "Put her through," Kane said. Elder Nyx's ancient voice filled the bridge. "We know what you've become, humans. We've seen species transcend physical reality before. You've passed beyond the boundaries of normal existence." "Then you understand what we're capable of," Kane replied. "You understand that this galaxy will never be safe from us." "Yes," Nyx agreed. "But we also understand that vengeance without purpose becomes meaningless destruction. What do you truly want, Captain Kane?" Kane was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical display, showing his transformed fleet spreading across the galaxy. Every ship was a reminder of humanity's death, and every crew member was proof of their resurrection. "We want remembrance," he finally said. We want the galaxy to remember that humanity existed, that we built cities among the stars, that we loved and dreamed and reached for something greater than ourselves. His voice carried the weight of 30 years of exile and loss. You tried to erase us completely. You wanted to pretend we never existed, but we refused to be forgotten. Elder Nix's response was soft but clear. Then let us remember. Let the galaxy build monuments to your species. Let human history be taught in every school, your achievements celebrated in every system. Words, Kane said dismissively. Empty promises from species that have already proven they cannot be trusted. Then what would satisfy you? Nix asked. Kane looked around his bridge at the crew that had survived 30 years in impossible space. These 47 humans were the last of their kind, but they had become something more than human. They were living proof that some forces could not be extinguished. We want a world, Kane said finally. A new Earth where the memory of humanity can live forever. Not just in monuments or museums, but in a place where human dreams can grow again. You're talking about resurrection, Nix whispered. Bringing your species back from extinction. We're talking about hope, Kane corrected. The one thing you couldn't destroy when you glassed our homeworld. The silence stretched across space as the galaxy processed this demand. A new world for a species that should be extinct. A chance for humanity to rise again from the ashes of their destruction. It will be done, Elder Nix finally said. The galaxy will provide you with a world suitable for human life. Your species will have a second chance. Kane nodded slowly. And in return, we'll release the transformed fleet. We'll return your people to their original forms, though they'll carry the memory of what we're capable of. Agreed, Nix replied. Let this be the beginning of a new understanding between humanity and the galaxy. As the Defiant began the process of reversing the fleet's transformation, Kane smiled for the first time in 30 years. Humanity would live again. The ghost ship had returned from the void not just to bring vengeance, but to ensure that humanity's story would never truly end. The dead had risen. The impossible had become reality. And somewhere in the galaxy, a new Earth was waiting to be born. The end.